Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the Post 102, Managing a Slump. What a great request this is, and it comes from the amazing Lena. Hi Lena. Lena was talking about how her PhD cohort has an experience of a slump after putting in a chapter to a faculty member, to an advisor, or doing a conference or doing an exam, and they've done this work, and then they've submitted that work, and then they're in a bit of an emotional and intellectual slump. And she asked me how that slump happens and how it's managed. So Lena, my absolute pleasure to deliver this request to you. And the literature that I've investigated for this particular post has been very, very diverse. So yes, I've looked at the sociology of work. I've looked at higher education studies. I've looked at leisure studies. I've investigated burnout. I've looked at theories of procrastination. And there's also been a very odd little interesting bit of the literature, and I don't know why, but an interesting bit of the literature about Christian churches going through a slump. So that's been the literature we've investigated. So recognizing all of that, let's now talk about the slump. But as always, what I want to do in these posts is come up with something for you at the end where you've got concrete strategies today that if you feel you are in a slump or you feel yourself sliding into that territory, we're going to come up with concrete behavioural changes for you today to stop that slide. Let's do this. So a slump is used a lot in sports studies, leisure studies, and the sociology of work. It's a metaphor as much as a trope to understand the highs and the lows of life, particularly a working life. It's also used by writers to try and describe burnout and procrastination. So how writers are doing okay, but then they hit a slump, and sometimes it's referred to as writer's block. So you can see why this matters so much to academics and matters so much to PhD students, because it is work and it's a slump in work, but it's also a slump in our writing and researching behaviour. So this is crucial. A slump is a moment of disappointment where we're not happy, or indeed we're just not happy enough. And we need to get into the originating definition here. So a slump is a subjective moment where there's a misalignment between how we believe we will feel when a task is completed, completing the task, and not feeling as we expected. See what's happened here? So this is how I'm going to feel. You enact that task, whatever that task is, and you don't feel like you expected. And in that misalignment is a slump. Now you've heard me talk so often about a minority, and it is a small minority, but a minority of PhD students that when they submit their thesis, they're not like, woo, 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 excited. Can I say that's a group? There's also a group, and I was one of these people, that you're just relieved. So you've submitted it and you're going, yeah, hell yeah, whoo, yeah, right? So there's that group. But there's a very small group, and it's happened physically 3 times to me, particularly when I was a dean, where a student submitted and then they physically slumped in my office. So slumped to the floor and started to cry. So when Lena talked about the slump, I first went to those 3 students that physically slumped after completing their PhD. So instead of expressing great happiness or great unhappiness at the moment of submission, the slump happened, the physical slump happened because the submission did not feel as the students expected it to feel. Right. So what we're learning so far is a slump is created when expectations are unfulfilled. Something big has happened, but the aftermath, often the emotional aftermath of that event, is disappointing. So what we've got going on here is an assumption of a normative narrative. That is, effort is rewarded. We do the effort, we expect a reward. Now, as we know, in late capitalism, that narrative is not accurate. There's another key assumption too, I think, that we feel, or we deserve to feel, happiness and success all the time. So you see, what's happening is a slump is created through an emotional state triggered by disappointment, that life is not progressing as we wanted it to progress. Therefore, you see, a slump is a proxy for a misalignment. So coming to life, coming to a doctorate, coming to research, coming to a relationship with an expectation of how it will be, and those expectations are not met. That's what a slump is. And of course, the problem is you're coming into life assuming that life and work and doctorate and research, that you're going to feel good about it. And this is not the time to feel good about it. Sorry about that. So actually, of course, most of the time, life and work is exploitative, is unpleasant, is tiring, and is disrespectful. So we confront bullying, harassment, gaslighting, intellectual theft, all the weird ego-fueled front stages that exist at the moment. Look at me, look at me, look at me. And if we approach a doctorate with the realization that, life and work most of the time is difficult, and most of the time we will not be rewarded for effort. Most of the time we won't have balloons that pop out when we do something, and there won't be sort of cheerleaders following us around going, woo, woo, come on, Tara, come on, come on. We haven't got those cheerleaders in life, even though it would be fabulous. So once we recognise, all right, that's our expectations and that would be fiction, then we're setting ourselves up to legitimately manage the vagaries of life. So if we expect life to be like social media, so like love idea, if we expect life to be like that, then we're going to be very disappointed. Actually, and my line on this, I know it upsets people, sorry, but I believe it because I know it to be true. What's the narrative of our lives? We live, we die, our stuff ends up in a skip. That's it. That's it. So I know this is quite depressing, but you see, that's why the slump occurs, because coming to terms with that reality that no one cares if we live or die, succeed or fail, no one cares, they're getting on with their own business. To realise that sort of throws us into a bit of a depression. So we finish a chapter for our advisors or our supervisors, we do that great conference presentation, we deliver a great lecture to students, and we expect sort of this brass band to follow us around or balloons to pop out of a box. But when we don't receive that type of acknowledgement or feedback or accolade, then we go and we enter a slump. Now, because we have to confront a deep and profound reality that no one actually cares whether we live or die, no one cares about our hopes and dreams, how do we handle that particularly horrific reality? Well, what we have to do, and this is crucial, we have to recontextualize our understandings of success and of failure. We have to understand our lived experience, our present, in its context. And we have to develop strategies to diagnose our present, understand it with reality, and then transcend it. But also, and I know this is really, really tough at the moment, we have to realise that our reality, our expectations, our assumptions are just not shared. The xenophobia, the hatred, the bullying, the profound jealousy, wow, that exists at the moment, so much of it, I think, is founded on a couple of very simple errors. And that is, we assume that how we think is how everyone else thinks, and how we feel is how everyone else feels. And that's just not true. So a slump emerges when we live our life through the what ifs rather than the what is. And because of the what is, and our what is can be really difficult and painful, then because we have to deal with things. See, in the what is, we've got to deal with threats in the workplace, perhaps in our interpersonal relationships, in our families. We've got to deal with threats to our health, that reaches sort of operatic status when we enter Dr. Google, and of course the vagaries of a doctorate. We can't change the past. We can't predict the future. So the slump emerges when we sit in this really unstable present. We're getting drawn into the what ifs of the past and the what ifs of the future, and actually we're spending a lot of energy worrying about what we can't change. So we expect happiness and success and acclaim, and life, colleagues, is just not like that. So slumps are created when we have expectations and assumptions that are not met within a lived empirical reality. So we are so excited when we enter a doctoral program. I'm a PhD student. Exciting. But of course, it's hard work for a long time, and it's filled with disappointments. It's filled with problems. It's filled with those expectations not being met day after day after day. And that's why I've always been a firm believer, in all my students, you know I've done this with you, but has always been to really be honest at the start. So my PhD setup document is a way to align expectations, assumptions and behaviour. That's why it exists. So it's having an overt discussion between advisors, supervisors and students about what this PhD is going to be like. And it's going to be a slog most of the time. There's going to be problems, there's going to be difficulties, there's going to be real profound issues. And what we as supervisors, advisors need to do is provide a shape. So explain what the what is going to be like, right? So that stops all the hopes and dreams stuff. This is reality. You want a doctorate? This is what we're doing. So slumps happen because we believe the fairy tale. And I've always argued that's the real danger of fairy tales being used in primary socialisation, because we walk through life thinking that life is going to end well, and we have this faith in a happy ending without any evidence at all. So actually, life gives us countervailing evidence to the happy ending every single day. There is no happy ending. There is no great job. There is no lotto win. But through these fairy tale structures, we ignore the actual evidence that's being presented to us in our lives that there's not going to be a happy ending. So we sort of endlessly expect this happy ending in our doctorate that never appears. Our supervisor advisor does not recognise how brilliant we are. How ridiculous is that? And of course, the feedback is tough. And where do we put all that information? Because expectations, our expectations, don't align with the outcome, don't align with reality. So to manage this dissonance and confusion, we enter a slump. These slumps are created through isolation. We feel let down, we feel frightened, we feel fear. The key in the slump is to recognise it. Okay, I'm in a slump. Label it. Use the language. Okay. And know that you're not going to be able to get out of that slump until you configure a scaffold to get yourself out of it. And that's what we're doing today. So slumps are very dangerous, colleagues, because they remove vision, they remove self-confidence, they remove determination, and they move grit. I would also argue that they remove reflexivity and consciousness as well, which is perhaps the most concerning. So if from a slump we understand the world around it, we call it a slump, and therefore we have scaffolding support from others, we can recalibrate the slump and also reconfigure our foundational understandings of what is success. So the way to manage a slump is to create a series, you wondered why the whiteboard was here, was to create a series of goals. So don't align completing one thing with success. So your entire definition of success in your life is about one goal. You are heading yourself to a living hell. Don't do it to yourself. So what happens, I think, particularly in doctoral programs, is we have this singular investment. So I am completely invested in this doctoral chapter. And when the brass band does not trumpet your success upon the submission of that chapter, you enter a slump. So the way to avoid that today is to configure multiple goals. And of course, I refer to that as the whiteboard method. So one task is finished and submitted, move to the next one. That's what I do every day. This is finished, move it down the whiteboard. Move it down the whiteboard. No investment, completion, great. Do a woo, 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 yeah. Move to the next goal. Momentum, momentum, momentum. And you see, what we're doing is we're reducing the investment in one task or one person. We're reducing the emotions and we're focusing instead on goal completion, and we're gaining intrinsic satisfaction from that completion. So life is not about absolutes, a doctorate is not about absolutes. So what we're doing is assembling multiple goals and targets to create momentum. Now, the wonderful Skylar Morris, love this book, has argued that a slump emerges when we get behind in our routine or tasks. I found that quite interesting. So when we feel like we're getting behind, that's the trigger to enter a slump. And Skylar Morris also argued that slumps emerge, I love this, slumps emerge when we enter a transitional moment in our lives. So if we're entering a transitional moment and we haven't prepared ourselves, that's the time for a slump. Very interesting argument. So a slump is an indicator that we have released our agency, that we've gifted our happiness, our success, our joy to another human being. Therefore, let's now, after this dark and very depressing conversation with the weird spooky lighting, let's now move to the positive bit, the light side of the force in this post, and provide concrete strategies for you today to, if you're in a slump, recognize it, use the language, and develop a scaffold to get yourself out of it. Okay, tip one. Remember that most academics have not been taught how to teach students to write. This is crucial. So I know we're all investing deeply in our advisors and our supervisors and our fantastic peers and mentors and so forth, our colleagues, and we invest in other people to provide feedback so that we can improve. Now, the first thing I need to say about all of that is please remember you are not your doctorate, you are not articles, you are not a book, you are not your relationships. So let's create a more compartmentalized self. Let's do that today. Now, whenever you say you are your doctorate, that's an inelegant proxy because it's blocking you centering yourself and valuing yourself rather than valuing the performance you give other people. Now, students get way too invested in the feedback from their supervisors and advisors. And we need to remember that most academics, our colleagues, my mates, we have degrees, undergraduate degrees in a discipline, sometimes a master's degree in a discipline, and a doctoral degree in a discipline. So those disciplines may be physics or biology or criminology or history. And that's great, and that is tremendous, and that is important. But you'll notice that those qualifications are not in writing. None of those qualifications are in academic writing. And very rarely, and can I say this is a problem, very rarely have any of us done a subject on writing history or how to write in criminology. Right? And because we haven't had that subject expertise, how do we teach how to write in criminology to others? Got it. So there's a series of assumptions when a student enrolls in a PhD that sort of the writing expertise of a supervisor or advisor will be poured somehow into the student. Now, Lawrence Oliver, in a great article way from the 80s, I think it might have been 1982, stated that, quote, students receive little or no advice on how to generate ideas or explore their thoughts, and they usually must proceed through the writing process without guidance or corrective feedback from the teacher. End of quote. So you can see we're entering a culture of fear and loss and confusion in response to your advisor, supervisor's feedback. Now, that is not about you. All of this is about how our universities as organisations are organised. Writing is not taught directly or overtly, and by the way, that's a real problem. And you're stressed because you think you're doing it wrong, and of course no one's actually told you what doing it right looks like. There's no singular mode of academic writing. Yes, there's grammar and punctuation and so forth. We know that, the error count. But actually there's a great diversity of academic writing modalities. So your confusions about writing are normal, rational and logical. Slumps are caused once more by expectation management. So please, talk with your supervisor. What I would do is I would call one meeting and say, could we just have one meeting in our candidature where we talk about writing? And ask your supervisor advisor to talk about how they learned to write and what they believe is important in writing in criminology or biology or physics. Ask them overtly about writing. And can I say, that conversation helps all of us, senior colleagues, all of us, because we have to be overt and explicit in our way of thinking about writing. So this meeting about writing, of course, stops the assumptions and aligns expectations and behaviour. 2, we all learn to write by writing. The students that worry me the most and get trapped in these slump loops are the perfectionists. And I've supervised a few. They're very, very difficult to supervise, if I'm honest. And because we've got to try and help them realise that writing doesn't spring from a keyboard perfectly formed, right? Writing doesn't emerge that way, right? My first draft is absolutely dreadful. It is disgusting. As we've talked about in the past, when I read my first draft, I go, you are an embarrassment, Tara. This is just embarrassing. This is disgusting. Oh my goodness me. Because good writing is not created by a first draft. Good drafting and good editing create outstanding writing. Now, the reason I have never had a slump is because I have no judgment on my first draft or my 10th draft or my 20th draft. No judgment. Oh, you're an embarrassment. So what are you going to do about it? We're going to work harder. We're going to draft this. So we draft it. And also, to be frank, I don't invest too much in the feedback of others. I've got some friends who are great writers who I respect their feedback. But what some random on the internet says about me and my writing, zero bothers. Zero bothers. Okay. So I also have, as you can see by the whiteboard, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of projects going on every day. And that means a micro failure or disappointment doesn't concern me at all. I just move on to the next thing. Momentum, awareness, a concrete plan are the strongest strategies you can deploy to avoid a slump. So just write. And we learn to write by writing. So what I need you to do is, this is hard, but I need you to force yourself to do this for me. Emotionally disconnect from your early drafts. Get the ideas down, no judgment. 3, always start working for yourself. You've often heard me describe this as pay yourself first. But there's a very strong suite of research, particularly aligned with Phyllis Kostenbaum, incredible research here, that shows that a fear of writing actually emerges through the fear of feedback. So it's not the writing that creates the fear, it's the fear of feedback on that writing. Very interesting. So I understand that your supervisor, advisor may frighten you, and you might respect them so much that you're investing all this stuff into their feedback. And the problem is, any critique from that sort of perspective will throw you into a slump. But always remember that all academic work is an act of the self first. Yes, you write for an audience, particularly examiners, but you must always start writing for yourself. No judgments. So while you welcome feedback, you are writing for yourself, and then you incorporate the ideas and views of others if they are appropriate. Now, this is, in education, we refer to this as intrinsic motivation, and it ensures that you don't allow the expectations and the assumptions from outside yourself that you have no control over to impact on your sense of self. Rock and roll. 4, feel the fear and do it anyway. Now, most of the literature that is exploring the slump focuses on fear. So when we feel fear, we enter a slump. Interesting. And lots of types of fears are being activated. Fear of being judged, fear of being ridiculed, fear of being laughed at, fear of being rejected, fear of reader or reviewer too. Remember, no one controls your emotional state except you. Let me state that again. No one controls your emotional state except you. No one controls the decisions that you make except you. No one reads your first drafts except you. You are your most important first audience. So there's nothing to fear. You are producing something for yourself. You are adding to the world, and that is something for admiration rather than fear. Excuse me, cough, here we go. 5, do not write to a deadline. Now, again, this is about stress management. Binge writing is always a mistake for many reasons, but doing very little, nearly swore there, doing very little and then forcing yourself to pump out words at speed to meet a deadline is absolutely ridiculous. It's ludicrous. Do not do this. And you see, what that does is it encourages those emotional highs and lows. That's incredible pressure. And say you do reach the deadline, binge writing, and you reach the deadline. That makes you fearful and gun shy the next time, okay? Little and often is a great methodology for writing. I would argue it's a great methodology for life. No one can do 10 hours of writing in a slog and then submit that first draft and think that it's going to be okay. You know that. Write in spurts, so without the pressure, and know that every single human being has a dreadful first draft, and great writing comes from great editing. 6, do not confuse immediate gratification with long-term goals. This is a great argument that's explored by Daniel Lucas, and he argued that too much of our culture right now is based on how we are feeling. Not about building a life and career with meaning and integrity and honesty, but this is simply about how I'm feeling today. This is also called the dopamine economy. A nice little literature's emerging here too about the dopamine economy. Slumps occur when we don't get that metaphoric or real sugar rush. But actually, we must stop wanting that metaphoric or actual sugar rush. You see, I'm going to tell you a tough truth from an old lady now. An academic life is a long life, colleagues. It's 20, 30, 40, 50 years of research and teaching. Ours is a lifelong voyage towards knowledge. So why would your best work appear at 25 or 35? You haven't read enough. You haven't worked hard enough. You've often heard me say, the PhD is the worst research you will ever do. The worst. So remember that academic life is a life. It's not an episode of a soap opera. 7, monitor your avoidance behaviours. Okay, here we go. One of the consequences of endlessly wanting that emotional sugar rush and sort of expecting a brass band and balloons to celebrate our achievements is when the sugar rush doesn't emerge, we often get avoidance behaviours. And these avoidance behaviours make failure more likely. So what are avoidance behaviours? Going, oh, this is a bit too hard. I'll watch some Netflix. I'll drink my own body weight in Chardonnay. Or how about I go and have a nana nap, right? Now, of course, what happens is avoidance behaviours waste time. They block solid time management skills and they can go into procrastination. So say you have a nana nap, all your problems still exist when you've woken up, except you've got less time. Okay, so from such a state, it's incredibly easy to become overwhelmed. Now, the way to manage this issue is to create a dedicated working environment. Doesn't matter if it's a kitchen table, but it is a place where your brain goes, this is a working environment. And then to get yourself back into the groove thing, I need you to create a series of goals that can be completed in 30 minutes. So you sit down at your kitchen table, you work for 30 minutes, you complete that goal, and you have a little party for one. Okay, and you can then schedule a break and so forth. You're building a new habit in yourself. This strategy, work in a particular place, complete a finite goal, and take a break. That will change your life. Rock and roll. 8, develop productive patterns. Motivation, even intrinsic motivation, is not enough to create emotional evenness. Willpower is just not enough. And you see, often people talk about willpower and motivation. For me, willpower and motivation are like fuel in a car. They can run out. And when they run out, you hit a slump. The one variable that we have control over is the behavioural patterns that we action every day. So, what time do we wake up? Do we read every day? Do we write at least 250 words every day? Behavioural patterns and investing in productive behavioural patterns allow us to reach our goals. When you're wishing for a benefactor or a break or a lotto win, that's going to create disappointment. But it's more serious than that. Here we go. When you are in a hole, when you are actually in a slump, remember, no one's going to see you. You're in a hole, you're waving, no one can see you. So therefore we need to, as an individual, come up with behavioural patterns that create the scaffold or the ladder to get you out of that hole. We need to remember that our hard work will not be rewarded. Our hard work may never be rewarded. But if we want to reach any sort of goal, then the only way to reach it is through hard work. So if you're in a bad place today, hi, you're fabulous, I see you. Do something for me. Tomorrow, make one change in your life, one change in your behaviour. Get up 30 minutes earlier, or read an article, or write 250 words for me. So what we're doing is we're changing one part of your behaviour, and this behavioural transformation will give you the momentum to lead you to a successful pattern. Okay, 9. This is the hard one. Know that terrible times are not meant to teach you anything. Know that terrible times are not meant to teach you anything. Terrible things happen to great people. And the problem emerges, I think, because particular versions of religion and particular versions of self-help sort of line up something between us doing something and a dreadful outcome occurring, right? So a lot of religions say if you do something, inverted commas, bad, then a bad thing will happen to you, right? Now, this is, of course, coming from the original sin, so this is about the apple. Eve went, oh, that looks shiny and nice. And then all the vagaries and pain of humanity occurred because Eve liked a bit of fruit, right? Okay, so her behaviour created a series of pretty dreadful outcomes, right? That's the original sin. So this confusion results in a catastrophic displacement of blame and shame. And it creates sort of this emotional pylon of embarrassment and fear and ridicule, right? So when something terrible happens, and it's happened to all of us, when something terrible happens, we all go through a series of questions for ourselves. The first question is always, why me? The second question is, what did I do wrong? And the third question is, what am I meant to learn from this? Terrible things happen to good people. And you know why? You didn't do anything wrong, and you're not meant to learn anything from it. A terrible thing has happened, you did nothing, and you're not meant to learn anything from it. It's just a terrible thing. So what I've learned in really tough times, and we've shared a lot of them, in really tough times, I've learnt not to affix blame, and I've learnt not to look for the learning or the learnings. I have a series of proxies, though, that I have developed to assess a bad situation, right? So maybe I can't avoid a train wreck. Often we can't. But we can, through our proxies, through recognising what's going on, we can slow the train down a bit and perhaps reduce damage. So I now have a pretty strong checklist created from qual and quant research about a problematic leader. So if I'm looking at a leader now, I'm looking at the institutional profile, in about 4 minutes, I can tell that there's going to be a problem there. Okay, I've done the qual and the quant research. I know what I'm looking at. But what living through terrible stuff has given me is the literacy to recognise a problematic situation is about to occur and to make the preparations to mitigate it the best I can. But also, once terrible things have happened to you, know that you have survived it, you have rebuilt your life, and you can do it again. 10. Find your why. Find your why. Slumps emerge because we don't know why we're putting ourselves through this hell. Why am I in this? Why am I doing this? This is crazy. Whether it's a PhD, writing an article, writing a book, doing a presentation, caring for another human being, right? These are tough tasks. And remember, we're living in a culture that wants the micro award, wants the brass band in response to opening an envelope, okay? For the really tough and meaningful acts in our life, in our work, in our caring infrastructure, there is no gratification, there is no award, and in fact, no one but us knows that something is occurring. Therefore, find your why. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through this? And look, try and make that why about you. What you're learning, the integrity of caring for another human being. The why of achieving a personal goal. All of those intrinsic imperatives reduce the chance of a slump. But the moment that you require that you're noticed or that you're celebrated or that someone tells you you're special, you're really special, if you're reliant on those types of external accolades, then you're going to be living a life of disappointment and confusion, constant slumps because your expectations are not being met. Slumps seem hyper-personal, but actually all they are a sign of is a misalignment between your expectations and your behaviour. Remember how much you have achieved and make decisions to build good patterns. Get up early tomorrow morning, read an article, write 250 words. That act, those behaviours, that's a choice. And that is a way to avoid a slump. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.